Welcome, everybody. My name is Heather Riggs. I'm Director of Administration here at NEMA. I'm just outside of Boston in Somerville. Kind of a rainy day here, so I hope it's nice and sunny where you're at today, and gorgeous August day. So to get started, we will start with our land acknowledgement by Scarlett.
Good morning, everyone. Virtual spaces cannot replace the lands that sustain and empower us. I am here in Herndon, Virginia, outside of New England, but it is the homelands of the Manahonek and Monacan people and their allied tribes, past and present. NEMA recognizes that our organization and those of our members were founded within a colonizing society, which continues the exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples throughout New England and beyond. You can use the Indigenous Peoples land map to locate the lands where your museum is located or where you're zooming in from today. Feel free to share in the chat. I've dropped a link, and thank you so much for being here with us this morning, and I'll turn it back to you, Heather.
Thank you, Scarlett. So before we get going, today's session is being recorded and will be available on the NEMA website later on. Same with a bunch of our other ones. So if you want to check out the website, there's a link to our YouTube channel with a bunch of recordings. So if you ever have a free afternoon and you want to go watch some former webinars and workshops, go ahead over there. The other thing is that today's will be a little interactive, just to give you a heads up that we will be breaking out into breakout rooms. So giving you fair warning on that one, there's some interactivity here. Yay! On that one. And if you want to type in the chat where you're calling from and who you are, that would be great. So everybody can see who's on the call today, if you want to touch base with them as well. So to get going, we are here for developing a visitor-centered approach to distance learning. Emily is a museum learning consultant and podcaster based in Raleigh, North Carolina. Kind of humid down there from what I hear today. She recently published a free downloadable guide called the Distance Learning Workbook, a launch guide for museums. She is also the host and producer of the Microsoft Libraries and Museum podcast and her own podcast, Museum Buzz. Prior to consulting, she created award-winning distance learning programs and interactive tools at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Her career began in political journalism at the Washington Post, where she posted daily political podcasts and weekly show at XM-Sirius Radio. Emily holds a master's degree in museum education from the George Washington University and a bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism from American University. So Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Heather, and thank you, Scarlett, and thank you everyone for joining today. Like Scarlett, I'm a little outside New England, but really excited to join you and talk to you today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just give me a thumbs up that you can see this. I'm going to go into present mode. So as we said, today it's loading. We are going to be talking about how to center visitors in developing your online learning programs. We're going to talk about why it's important to involve visitors, looking at then three different strategies that three different museums have used to involve visitor voices. And then, as Heather said, there is an interactive piece. We're going to do a group activity where we really get to reflect on our own practices and the strengths and limitations of different strategies, and then open it up to Q&A. So without further ado, we're going to move right along and think about the why is a very important place to start. These are two quotes that I like to draw from when thinking about the importance of involving visitors. The first is, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go further, go together. And to me, it speaks to this idea that when we work together, we create more enriching programs, more relevant programs, and more meaningful programs. It's obvious, it can be, we've all done programs by ourselves. There's a time and place for that too. But I think when we bring in our visitor voices, we create a more relevant experience. And it kind of leads me into the next one, which is from a book by Nina Simon. The quote is, relevance is a paradox. It's essential. It gets people to pay attention, to walk in the door, to open their hearts. But it is also meaningless without powerful programming on the other side of the door. If the door doesn't lead to valuable offerings, if nothing touches people's hearts, interest fades. And to me, it is that cyclical. The way to make that meaning is to invite visitors in so that when other visitors of that same group come in, they see themselves reflected in the programs that you've developed. So I'll leave that here for a second and leave that thought with you as we go to moving into how. How do we involve visitors? These are some questions, some overarching questions that we're going to address in looking at these three different examples in a minute. When we involve visitors, and the examples that I have today are, the examples are teachers, but the strategies that we have could be used for families, it could be used for seniors, it could be used for whoever your target audience is. But as you think about involving visitors, 3 questions to consider is, where do they fit into the design of your program? Is it happening before? Is it happening during or after? What value and perspective do they bring? And how do you compensate them for their time and their knowledge? And it doesn't have to be really a huge amount, but that it becomes a mutually beneficial relationship. It's a give and take, and not just a thank you for your 2 cents. But it really creates a sense of investment in that, again, that you're going further together, that everyone is working together towards a larger goal to develop really meaningful distance learning programs. So now we're going to go into these 3 different strategies. The first example that I'm going to talk about is from the Adirondack Experience, the museum on Blue Mountain Lake. I'm using this example because I recently have worked with them to develop their virtual field trip programs. So I feel comfortable speaking about what they've been up to. They, like many museums, the Adirondack Experience Museum had very successful in-person school programs. They're based in upstate New York, right in the heart of the Adirondacks. They would be going into schools in the 12 counties that touch the park. When the pandemic hit, they had to switch really quickly to distance learning and to try to meet the audience where they were. Since they had a successful long-running school outreach program, they had really invested in deep relationships with those teachers. And so in that pivot, they could address the teachers and invite them into their program development. And so those teachers, they came in from all grade levels because they were trying to create programs. They were trying to translate in-person programs into the digital space, but also think about ways that they could then adapt those to other grade levels. So they brought these teachers that they had longstanding relationships with. They created a teacher advisory committee, and this group helped them form the content. They helped them test out ideas of which activities would work in the live virtual experience versus pre and post visit activities, thinking about the structure of those. And then afterwards, as the program was developed, these teacher advisory committee members also helped them pilot the programs. So it provided a really safe space for the museum to try out these new programs before really blowing it out. The benefit too of having these teachers in these longer relationships is that those teachers then become ambassadors for the museum in their school. And so those teachers can tell their colleagues about the programs at the Adirondack Museum. I kind of touched on this idea, but it has the benefit of these long-term relationships, that it is a more of a time commitment, and the way that the Adirondack Museum kind of compensated them, at least at the beginning, for their initial kind of quick feedback time, was they did give them like a little gift card. And then I think also they see it as a mutually beneficial relationship because these teachers are having access to these programs kind of first off, and then they also, I think they might be getting memberships, but they want to make it so that it's worth the teacher's time, because teachers are really busy. And so it's a way to bring them into the conversation. And so that's one. I'm kind of going through these quickly so we can also get to the group activity, but this is one example of using an advisory committee. And again, this could be used for a family advisory committee, or seniors as you're developing, or adults as you're developing these distance learning programs. For the Adirondack Experience, they're also now using that advisory committee. They're starting to meet regularly, virtually still. They're helping to create teacher professional development programs. And so that committee is providing this perspective, this voice of reaching the schools and reaching the teachers in a way that makes the most sense for their curriculum. This is a quote from Christinecampo, the school programs manager. Maybe some of you know her. Teachers validated that our programs were still valuable to them and they still wanted what we were offering. And so I think that is also helpful to think about when you have that visitor voice in your process. It can kind of help you set you on the right direction, that you don't feel like you're getting too off course as well. So I appreciated that quote from Christine. The next example in thinking about strategies for involving visitors is the idea of co-creation. I'm pulling this example because that's me, one of the pictures from several years ago. But that's where I worked for several years developing distance learning programs. And some of the first programs we developed were these semester-long online courses for high school students. And the way that we created them were these multi-day curriculum workshops where we invited actually not only teachers, but we also invited content experts and community members and some of our docents into the process. And together, we identified the learning goals of what do we want students to learn in this program. Together, we identified objects that would help support those learning goals and those ideas. We developed activities that students could complete in the course. And then we would also bring in, and this was kind of a great way to collaborate within the museum, is over that workshop period, we would have our curators come and also talk about the objects. We would have the people that were there present about different topics so that together we were really getting inspired from the multiple perspectives that were being presented. In that sense, for those couple days, we paid them for their time and we provided food and things like that. But it was really a very enriching way to provide multiple perspectives. After that was done, we then would break up into, if people wanted to continue a contract with the museum, they would actually help write the course content. I was overseeing managing and editing that process. But again, they were bringing and kind of creating one voice into a course. Since if you have multiple writers, you can get lots of different voices in terms of the look or the feel of it. But it was an opportunity, again, to continue that they were really invested. We were really bringing them into how we were creating these courses. And then with let's say the content experts, or when I say content experts too, I mean, one of the courses we created was a fashion course. And so in that workshop, we invited not only art teachers and staff, as I mentioned, but local fashion designers, and they brought their textiles and they brought their wares, and we talked about their process and we connected it to the works of art. And so then we would then kind of ask them, maybe not to write because people's time is really valuable, but we would ask them to come back and maybe make a video with us to show how they do something or talk about their process. And so this was a shorter term investment in the relationships, but it was really kind of a short, intense way to connect with people to create these courses. And when we created that content, especially the multimedia content like the videos, then you have an asset that you can use in your interpretation. You have it where you can attach it to an online resource and a lesson plan. So when you're creating content, that's just a side note, but it can be used in a lot of different ways. And so this idea of co-creation continues now at the NCMA and a lot of what the education department does. This is and I want to also back up and say that the NCMA, I'm giving you different examples of strategies, but also trying to demonstrate different types of museums, because I'm sure that people here are from museums of all stripes. The North Carolina Museum of Art is based in Raleigh, where I'm also based. It has this encyclopedic collection of ancient Egyptian art all the way to modern and contemporary. It has a sculpture park and an amphitheater with movies and concerts. Not concerts anymore, but they used to. And the Adirondack, if I back up a second, is a regional history museum. And so I think there's something to the idea that it doesn't matter necessarily how big you are or what your mission will vary from museum to museum. Your size and your collection will vary, but the strategies can still be applied, or the best practices with these strategies can still be applied no matter kind of what size or what content you have. So just adding that in there so you kind of get some context of where this is, and that the NCMA is a bigger museum, let's say, than the Adirondack, or bigger than the other example I'm about to show you. But there are ways to bring people into that process. This is a quote from a colleague, Kristen Smith. "Teachers are our most valued collaborators. When we enlist educators to be presenters, co-designers, or writers, our resources, workshops, and events are infinitely more meaningful to our educator audience." And to me, that gets back to that first quote about seeing themselves in the product, that when they walk through that door of your programming or through your museum, they see themselves, and they see themselves heard and listened to. The last strategy that I'll talk about, or the last kind of two, are focus groups and a survey. This is something I'm working with currently. This is like hot off the presses from the Westmoreland Museum of American Art. It's a small art museum outside of Pittsburgh, and they have a whole collection focused specifically on Southwestern Pennsylvania artists. Like the Adirondack, and maybe like many of you, they had a successful in-school or in-person school a docent program, tour program. And then when the pandemic hit, they switched to distance learning. This was last fall, where they created a set of 6 new virtual field trip programs. And we developed them internally. So at that point, and this is where kind of where does the person fit into the process? Where are they in your design? They don't have to be at every step of the way. So they decided we needed to create these courses, these virtual field trips now. And so we created them among the educator who was there. And obviously when you're in your museum, you have that institutional knowledge that you're bringing to the program, and then work with 2 other contractors to develop these courses. There were some staffing changes. And then now they're looking to say, okay, before we actually launch these programs, do they hit? Do they land? Do they work with our audience? Or this is what we think this is what they're interested in based on, we had popular programs for our in-person programs, or these are popular for our in-person programs. Will that translate into virtual? So that's where it started, is what worked really well in person and how can we bring that virtually? But when you make that jump into the virtual space, they want teachers now to bring their perspective and say, yes, this works. This is what I would do differently. And so the way that we're doing that is twofold. The first is a survey. So a survey where we're having the teachers just look at the course content, give feedback, rate it. And what's nice about a survey is that it allows teachers to do it on their own time. It's pretty linear. It's not as time intensive as maybe as the other strategies that we talked about. However, the flip side of that is that we also want to do a focus group. And so what we're going to do is provide a survey to teachers. And then about a week or 2 later, they have a deadline to complete the survey and then come together in a focus group. The focus group allows a more non-linear, there's still a goal and there are still questions that we want to ask and information that we want to get out of teachers, but it does allow more of a non-linear experience where you have your questions, but with a focus group, and you have a facilitator, and we can talk later about how to rerun a focus group. But when you're running a focus group, you have someone who's really listening, and you want to usually record it so that you can listen and take notes later, because in the moment there might be new information that emerges, a new idea, kind of an unintended outcome that comes out of it that you want to follow. And so between these 2 strategies, we're hoping then to update the courses, update the virtual field trip programs so that teachers are more likely to sign up for them, that there's courses and there's content that are more interesting for their students. And so that's right now how this is happening. The survey is being developed right now. The focus groups are happening in a couple of weeks. And similarly, we're compensating them through the museum with gift cards if they complete the focus group and the survey. What's also nice is that the survey provides just written feedback that you can draw on, you can go back to again and again. And when you record a focus group, you can also go back and hear the content directly from the visitor. So those again are just different ways when we think about advisory committees that can meet regularly and provide feedback. You have co-creation where you're really bringing people in. I have no quote because it's still ongoing. And then the focus group and survey are paired nicely together. They don't always have to be paired. We don't always have time, and sometimes we don't need to pair them. But different types of strategies allow different time commitments from the people. It allows you maybe with a survey, especially if you reach out to more people, you can, if you're not wanting to maybe have a follow-up focus group, you can really hit a lot of people. Something that's come up in the past is also thinking about the balance between gathering visitor feedback and the museum's institution, because you don't necessarily, you have to, it's a balancing act. Visitor feedback is there to inform the decisions that you make, and inform maybe how the program's developed or what objects you use or what activities might be better for that specific audience, but it's not meant to completely outweigh, obviously, the goals and strategies of the museum. But without it too, I think you kind of, without that visitor voice, you might miss the mark. And so bringing visitors into the process allows you to find a little bit more equilibrium and a little more balance, and making sure that you're hitting the mark, that you're hitting the target when you're reaching out to that audience. And it's something that they really see themselves wanting to sign up for, that they're motivated, and that it provides an affinity more towards your museum because they feel heard and listened to in those programs. So what I want to do now is we're going to do our group activity. And what I'm going to do is close out of this for a second. Some of you might have used Jamboard before. Some of you, this might be new, so I'm just going to demonstrate what we're going to do. These are the 4 kind of approaches that I talked about today. Advisory committees, co-creation, focus groups, surveys, and there might be other strategies that you've used that you might want to add in here. This is essentially a collaborative sticky note activity. To create a sticky note, if you want to add your thoughts, you're going to go over here on the left-hand side, there's a dashboard. To this little square, it says sticky note. You click and that pops up. It says sticky note. If you can pick your color, and you can write a note. So a strength about advisory committee is that you get, I'm just going to give an example, deeper relationships, let's say. And you can see across the bottom, there's a little blue line that gives you your word count if you're running out of room. When you hit save, it goes onto the board. You can keep writing another one. Or when you're done, you can hit cancel. Once the sticky note is on here, you can delete it. You can move it around because once people start going in, it can populate quickly. So you can make it a little smaller. But the idea is together thinking about the strengths and limitations of these different strategies based on maybe what I shared today, but also based on your own experience. So I'm going to pause here, and Scarlett is going to let me know how many groups we're going to break into, and then I'll drop those links in the chat. And so when you get into your group, you'll see what group number you're on. So you can see here, you'll see which link to pick.
We have 3 groups.
Okay, perfect. Which one do we have? Drop this here. Okay, so we'll break up into groups, and I'm going to jump around to the different groups. So I'll see you all in a minute when Scarlett sends us off.
And we'll be sharing the results back again, correct?
Yes, thank you, Heather. Yes,
Okay.
so after we're gonna spend about 10 minutes. I can pop around and see if we need more or less time, but about 10 minutes in here populating the boards. And then we're going to come back and look at what are the emerging trends and ideas that are coming out of the sticky notes.
Okay.
Breakout rooms are open. You should have an alert to enter a breakout room. So.
And I will pause the recording now.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I really enjoyed popping around. And every webinar is a little different. I love that the Jamboard was secondary to the really great conversations happening in person and talking. And so I was mentioning this to Heather, but what we can do is I can send out the links to these Jamboards so that later you can go back and visit the ideas that you discussed and you could see what other people discussed. I'm going to share them in a minute. I'm just conscientious of time. But I want to, in each group, there were interesting pieces that stuck out. And so I want to just maybe start there and then quickly go over through the Jamboards. But in the first group, there was a discussion, I think, about just being a small one-person team, a small museum, one-person team. How can I run a focus group or an advisory committee? That's a lot. And I think there was a discussion that then went to thinking about a survey as a way that one person can reach many. A survey allows maybe more reach because it's not as time intensive, that kind of asynchronous interaction. On the flip side, creating synchronous activities, how do you make those inclusive so that people that it's a diverse group, that you get multiple perspectives, and it's not just people who have the time to be there. And so there are pros and cons to these different strategies, the strengths and limitations that came up. And I think a lot of, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. The biggest probably kind of limitation for a lot of these is time commitment. People's time is really valuable. Teachers are really busy. When we look across the 3 boards, we're seeing time commitment is a barrier to entry. But I think that there are, having a little bit of feedback is kind of better than zero. But just by everyone being here, no one is starting from zero. Everyone is starting somewhere, and they're thinking about how to incorporate those voices. And sometimes it can just be in the last group we were talking about, how to even reach an audience. If you want to do a survey, how do you reach that audience? And one tip is thinking about who are your partners, who are your allies in the education space, or in the audience that you want to reach, let's say, and where is your audience getting information, so that you're not creating a survey and trying to send it out on your own, which you can do also through membership lists. But does the school district have a newsletter that already goes out that you can add your link into, so that you're reaching eyeballs and mouse clicks where people are already looking? And the questions can be really simple and straightforward. These little things, these things can start in one little step at a time, but it can help just redirect to say, oh, this is our most, very teachable object. And these are the questions that keep coming up about it. So I want to make sure my program addresses that. When we look here, I think another limitation looking across the boards, time commitment was common across the limitations. In this last group, ensuring we have enough staff to keep up and manage with longer term projects. I think there was also another post-it note here thinking about make sure roles and expectations are clear. So who is involved in managing those expectations? It's almost like how to make sure it doesn't become limiting to people. You can use this and make it a strength so that people know exactly what they're getting into. But knowing what you're getting into, I think it kind of leads into in group 2, there's a discussion of how do you, I think Deborah mentioned this question of how do you ideate in productive ways? And so having a goal of exactly what you want to get out of that survey, what you want to get out of the teacher advisory committee or the focus group. It's work on your part too, as the museum to develop this and to invest in it. It's a time commitment, not just for the participants, but for you. And so thinking about how you're structuring it so that it's helpful and that they want to keep coming back and giving feedback is something that seems to be coming up here. If we flip and look at the strengths, I'm just going to move this up a little bit. I think a deeper relationship, the limitation is time, but the strength is that you're developing trust with your audience. You're getting I'm looking at specifically in focus groups, you get this variety of perspectives. If you can get that audience, I think to the first group, thinking about how do you make it inclusive, but the strength is when those people give you their time, that you're hearing really valuable information that helps you make decisions. And I like the idea, the language around informing your decision, actually more than making a decision, but informs your thinking of how you're going to develop that program. This is one that came up too at the end, asking teachers for input into curricular needs. This is a strength of using their language in your programs, let's say specifically for teachers. And the same thing could be true for families or other audiences. When you're speaking their language in your programs or your advertising, they see it, they recognize it. And so by hearing that language and hearing those common themes from your audience, you can then bring that into your planning. And then again, going back to that first quote about relevance, you're opening the door for this opportunity to engage with them. they see themselves and they see, okay, it's not going to be a barrier to interact because I see myself in that, and I know that I can participate. I know that my curriculum needs are met, my standards are there. It's going to make it easier for me to take that, go to my curriculum coordinator or my principal and say, I want to sign up for this, and say, okay, great. So that, I think that's that came up a lot as well. I'm just going to look through as well. This question, this note here in group 2 of tokenization of people from marginalized communities. I think that gets to some, I am going to look for, let's see. She might turn off her camera, so I can't see her name. But the discussion around how do you make it inclusive so that marginalized communities aren't left out of the conversation just because they can't, let's say, make it to the museum or come. And so thinking inclusively, you know, maybe it's not only a survey, but it's going into it's meeting them where they are, whether it's using a newsletter or it's meeting them in their space. If you're doing a focus group or something, so that it makes it's a low barrier for anyone to participate in the feedback that you're looking for. I want to leave, there's a lot of really good things here. I want to take a quick, I'm going to do a quick poll with everybody. I'm going to see if you can see this, because I want to just take a quick temperature of where people are at right now in terms of which visitor-centered approach are you most interested in. And so you'll see it pop up on your screen. It's anonymous. We don't know who is picking which one. So if you want to take, you know, just 30 seconds and pick that, we'll see where people are. Okay, looks like I'm gonna launch the poll. We can share results together. So it looks like most people are really interested in a mix. I'm wondering in a minute if you can maybe just put in the chat, which mix of approaches are you most interested in?
I think this this group was really chatty in the breakout rooms.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
The quieter in the chat.
That's okay. Then I'll stop sharing this. And I'm going to close that out. What I want to do now is go back to here and just say a quick, okay, we did the poll. Something that kind of to leave you with as we jump into the Q&A is for you to think about, what is your action step? Either right now for a minute or as we leave today, as you think about these mixed approaches that you want to take, what is one thing, you can write it down on your piece of paper next to you or in your mind or in the chat. What are you going to do today? What would you like to do today to start that process? And as you're thinking about that, I just want to, before we go into Q&A, this is my email. You're welcome to email me. This is my website. A lot of the ideas came out of, as Scarlett and Heather mentioned earlier, the distance learning workbook. It's a free download from my website. I think Scarlett's going to drop the link in the chat. And so without further ado, we'll move into Q&A in the last few minutes. It was rapid fire, but there's a lot to talk about, and it's exciting to share it with everybody. I'm going to start as you think about what questions you might have. I see Julia has a question about technology barriers or technology needs to connect with schools. When I've done focus groups, I've seen teachers, I don't know if you mean connecting with schools in like a focus group setting or more like a virtual field trip setting. Which one are you referring to?
Either one. I'm dealing with IT folks at my new place where they're very focused on using Microsoft 365. And will that be a limitation? Like, you know, are there going to be specific technology tools that are going to make it easier for us to connect either with teachers or with students? in terms of what they're using for kind of their collaboration and their virtual frameworks and stuff like that.
I think what I've found so far in developing virtual field trips is that there's a mix. Usually museums have a platform that they like to use, but as they book with teachers, they basically ask the teacher, can we use our platform? Or would you like to use yours? And I'll just come in as a co-host or a guest speaker, basically. So, I know that for Google Hangouts, a lot of schools have a lot of security restrictions around, schools accessing someone else's Google Meet. And so they've had to then switch. What I would say is if you're whether they're coming into your platform or you're using theirs, I would definitely do a test call with the teacher if you can. It can be a 5-minute, just make sure you're able to connect. But I think that's where they're, like for example, the Adirondack, I think they got a grant to develop these programs. And as part of the grant, they invested in a big Cisco WebEx system. But a lot of schools don't use that. And so they're having to find different ways to use that technology because they're finding that schools are wanting to use the platform that they are choosing for their students. So it usually is a conversation really with the school. So there's a note in the chat from Heather about a webinar facilitating successful youth programs in a virtual world, and maybe there's more information about that.
Yeah, I was trying to get the link, but I embedded it in the website. So Julia, they kind of talked a little bit about that as well, because I know a bunch of our education ones, they've brought up the technology, and it basically comes down to what the school is using is what you use.
I think there was a question that came up in one of the small groups about how do you know who to talk to in wanting to run, how to involve visitors? And I think, the title of the webinar is involving visitors, and that's a really big statement. But what's can be really helpful in thinking about who to reach out to is really knowing who your target audience is. What program are you developing and who is it for? And reaching that audience, because that's where you'll get the most helpful feedback. If that's what you want the feedback to be about. If you're just generally wondering if people like the museum, that would be a different way to get feedback, and you could use a membership list to reach out. But the more that you can talk to the target audience that you're developing something for, that will help you know who to reach out to and what questions you want to ask. And maybe it's something really specific, or it's a specific task you want them to try online or at home to see if the at-home activity works. But that's a way to kind of figure out who you should talk to. And I know there sounds like there's some people that are here that they're in a new institution and they're just trying to get a gauge of who their audiences are and where are they. So I think going back to, Julia's point is finding partners, finding allies that are reaching that audience and working together to find that group.
Paul has a good question there. I'm so focused on delivering experiences versus content, facts, etc. Any advice on how to think about this in a virtual space, how to measure success?
How to measure success. I would say that, it can be done in multiple ways. I go back to a survey or focus groups again. You can bring the people who experience that program. Experience versus content. Do you mean like the experience, the opportunity to have an interactive experience is overtaking the ability to deliver the content of your museum? I'm saying yes. But this is in the virtual space. I guess can you give me an example? Because I guess I don't always see them as two different things, because an experience would be based on the content of the museum. Okay. It is tough to get people to eat vegetables in a virtual space. But depending on, again, I don't know what the program is, but they likely have produce in their own house. So you can have them do an in-house scavenger hunt and have them bring what they are and have it be an opportunity to share about what produce, how do you talk about farming, and how are you, maybe you're running people are sharing their own gardening experiences, or they're bringing their own produce to the virtual table and to talk about it. So I think leveraging where people are in their space can be a way to share. And then with virtual, often stated ideals that they come, it creates an affinity with the museum and they want to come and then pick the vegetables at your museum. Yeah, games and activity. Yeah, sure. Uh-huh. Right. It's hard. I think to that point, Paul, like the Adirondack, they had a very successful, I know we're like 1 minute away, so I'm gonna like zip through this. They had an in-person program about the fur trade in like the 18th century between indigenous tribes and European settlers. And the big thing was that they would bring these pelts from the museum to the school and kids could touch the pelts. Obviously, you cannot touch pelts on like a virtual space. So what we did though, is we thought about the different pieces of that experience. And part of that in-person experience is that they would then play a fur trading game. And so the game is what we brought into the program. We had the pelts. However, we can show the pelts or show pictures, but that the interactive piece was the game about understanding how the fur trade worked at that time. So just add that in there too. So I know it's 11 o'clock, so now I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you so much, Emily, for sharing. Thanks everybody for participating in this one. I always appreciate when we're able to communicate with each other, because I think the way in which we learn in the field is definitely talking to each other. And so I'm glad that everybody was able to join us today. And as Scarlett mentioned, we do have the survey there. I will be sending up a follow-up link with Emily's notes from the Jamboard to share that with everybody that was on today's webinar, and that's great. Don't forget, as I was mentioning earlier in the chat, we have a ton of great content on our website, and we also have our annual conference coming up in November. So make sure to check us out there. It will be November. I'm not going to say the dates right now because it's the third week of November. Scarlett will have it for me instead. So I want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to Emily. And I will be following up, and I hope to see you at a future program. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for
Bye.
everyone's participation.
All right. Thanks. Bye.